The Oracle of Delphi, whispers from the abyss of time. The Oracle of Delphi, perched upon the sacred slopes of Mount Parnassus, has always occupied a space somewhere between myth and reality, between the fire of faith and the shadow of deception. And when one begins to unravel the web of its enigmatic history, a haunting question emerges. Were the cryptic utterances of the Pythia, the priestess said to channel the voice of Apollo, genuine messages from the divine, or were they elaborate constructions designed to control kings, armies, and empires? Imagine stepping back into the marble courtyards of Delphi during its height in the classical age, when leaders traveled vast distances, carrying with them offerings of gold, silver, and the spoils of conquest, hoping to hear a few words that could decide the fate of nations. The air would be thick with incense, the murmur of prayers, and the sound of wind echoing through the rocky gorges. But somewhere beneath the grandeur and ritual lies the unsettling possibility that what was delivered as divine wisdom was in truth a carefully crafted illusion, rooted in psychological manipulation, natural phenomena, and the desperate human need for certainty in uncertain times. The Pythia herself, seated upon a tripod above a fissure in the earth, would inhale vapors rising from the depths, her body trembling, her eyes rolling back. And in this frenzy she would release fragments of speech, broken syllables, half-formed words, incoherent cries. These would then be carefully shaped by priests into polished hexameter verse, words that seemed dripping with mystery, yet vague enough to be molded to any future event. The most haunting example is the prophecy delivered to King Croesus of Lydia. When he asked if he should wage war against Persia, the oracle replied, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus, blinded by his ambition, assumed it meant Persia would collapse. But when he crossed the Halys River and attacked, it was his own empire that crumbled. Was this an accident of ambiguous phrasing, or a calculated strategy by the priests to ensure they could never be wrong? The hidden meaning of Delphi's prophecies lies in this double-edged ambiguity. They reflected back to the seeker not divine truth, but the shape of his own desire, fear, and blindness, so that what collapsed was not merely kingdoms, but the very notion of certainty. Yet deeper still lurks another layer of mystery, one not rooted in politics, but in the trembling earth itself. For centuries, scholars dismissed the idea of intoxicating vapors rising from the temple floor as mere legend, until geological studies revealed fault lines beneath Delphi, releasing ethylene gases that could have induced a trance-like state. If so, then the Pythia was not merely performing, but was physically overwhelmed, her mind slipping into a dreamlike realm where the boundaries of language and vision blurred. Was Apollo then a metaphor for the earth itself? A god who spoke not through celestial authority, but through the very chemistry of the stone and soil beneath? And if her visions were chemically induced, does this strip them of their divine aura? Or does it instead remind us that the sacred and the scientific are two faces of the same mystery? That what we call prophecy might be the raw voice of the planet erupting through fragile human vessels? Consider, too, how the power of the oracle lasted for over 1,000 years, surviving political upheavals, the rise and fall of empires, and even skepticism from philosophers who questioned the gods. What force could sustain belief for so long, if not the deep psychological grip of mystery itself? Leaders wanted to believe that their fate was written in the stars, that a god's whisper could provide clarity. Ordinary people wanted to believe that beyond the chaos of war and plague, there was order, meaning, a voice that understood what lay ahead. The oracle became less about the accuracy of predictions and more about the performance of mystery, the theater of the unknown. Each visitor entered the sanctuary not simply to hear words, but to experience awe, fear, and the trembling realization that human destiny might be scripted by forces beyond comprehension. And in this theater, the priests of Apollo played their roles to perfection, ensuring that ambiguity remained the sharpest weapon. For ambiguity allows the prophecy to live, to survive reinterpretation, to slip through centuries without being disproven. It is no accident that the most famous prophecies, the fall of empires, the victory of kings, the omens of disaster, are wrapped in such careful vagueness that they can never be pinned down. In that vagueness, we find the true genius of Delphi, not to reveal the future, but to force humanity to wrestle with its own uncertainties, to project hopes and fears onto words that became mirrors rather than windows. Even now, thousands of years later, we are drawn back to Delphi, not for what it revealed, but for what it concealed. The hidden meaning of the oracle is not that the gods spoke, but that the hunger for prophecy, for certainty, is eternal. That the human soul will travel across continents, sacrifice treasures, and kneel in temples built upon trembling earth just to hear that the chaos of life might have a pattern. To understand Delphi is to understand ourselves, that we are creatures desperate to weave meaning into the void, to turn the cracks in stone and the fumes of the earth into the language of gods. And perhaps that is the darkest truth of all, that prophecy works not because it predicts, but because we believe, and in that belief we make it real. When Croesus crossed the river, it was not Apollo who doomed him. It was his own unshakable trust in a prophecy designed to never be wrong. Thus, the oracle of Delphi remains less a relic of the past than a mirror held up to our present. We still search for voices that promise clarity, still read omens in data and patterns in chaos, still mistake ambiguity for insight. The whispers of Delphi have not gone silent. They have only changed their disguise, for the hunger for prophecy is eternal. And perhaps the most unsettling prophecy of all is this, that no matter how far humanity advances, we will always kneel before the unknown, desperate for someone or something to tell us what comes next, even if the answer was always hidden inside ourselves. Nostradamus, Shadows in the Mirror of Time. Nostradamus, the French physician turned seer of the 16th century, stands as one of history's most perplexing and enduring prophets, his quatrains shimmering in the twilight zone between poetry and revelation, between cryptic musings and the alleged handwriting of destiny, and as we peer into the pages of his Les Prophecies, we cannot help but feel the chilling sensation that we are being watched not by the past, but by the future itself. A future written centuries before it unfolded, yet always cloaked in words so slippery that they evade final capture. For Nostradamus did not speak plainly, but veiled his visions in the fog of allegory, ancient languages, astrological references, and a disjointed syntax that makes even the sharpest minds stumble in their interpretation, which is precisely why his name refuses to die. Because each generation, in its own moment of crisis, reaches back into his verses and finds, like Croesus at Delphi, the echo of its own hopes and terrors reflected back at it. And thus his prophecies are forever alive, forever relevant, forever mysterious, an immortal puzzle that changes shape depending on who gazes upon it. Imagine Nostradamus at his writing desk in Provence, a man haunted by plague, war, religious turmoil, and the fire of the stars overhead, scribbling down his visions by candlelight, encoding them into quatrains of 4 lines, each a riddle dense with symbols, blood and fire, kings and beasts, comets and storms. And consider how, across centuries, readers claim to see in those lines the rise of Napoleon, the reign of Hitler, the horrors of the Great Fire of London, even the apocalyptic destruction of New York's Twin Towers in 2001. As if Nostradamus had peered through the veil of time and captured snapshots of events so far removed from his world that only a mind truly touched by the divine or by madness could have recorded them. But the hidden meaning lies not merely in the possibility that he foresaw the future. It lies in how his words are constructed like mirrors that adapt to the shape of whatever stands before them. His prophecies, written in a blend of Old French, Latin, Greek, and riddled with wordplay, resist final interpretation, which allows them to survive any debunking, because the vagueness itself is their armor, their power, their secret. And yet, some quatrains feel so eerily specific that even skeptics shudder, like the one describing the young lion overcoming the old in single combat on the field, which many saw fulfilled when King Henry II of France was killed in a joust, a lance piercing his eye in precisely the manner Nostradamus described. Or the chilling lines of "From the depths of Western Europe, a poor man's child shall be born with great tongue, who shall seduce a great troop," interpreted as Hitler, whose rise was unforeseen by logic but fits perfectly into the riddle's cruel poetry. Still, what if the truth is stranger? What if Nostradamus was less a seer and more a master of pattern recognition, reading the cycles of politics, astronomy, and human folly, then embedding them into timeless metaphors that would always, inevitably find resonance in future chaos? Perhaps the hidden meaning of Nostradamus is that history itself is a cycle, a repetition of ambition, violence, and collapse, so that a man attuned to patterns could anticipate the echoes without divine intervention, crafting verses that became prophetic not because they saw the future, but because the future is always repeating the past in different masks. Yet the mystique persists, and it deepens when one considers the secretive way he published his work, wary of both church and crown, disguising his prophecies to evade persecution, which only adds to their aura of forbidden knowledge, like coded messages whispered across time. Readers feel not merely informed, but initiated, as if unlocking a riddle meant for a chosen few. And in that sense, Nostradamus is not just a prophet, but a trickster, a poet who understood that mystery is more powerful than clarity, that the imagination of the reader would do half the work, breathing life into his lines across centuries. Why else would dictators, presidents, and ordinary people alike turn to his prophecies during times of fear? Why else would his words surge in popularity during every war, every plague, every disaster, as though humanity cannot resist the lure of a man who seemed to stand outside of time? The hidden meaning, then, is not in the accuracy of his predictions, but in what they reveal about us. That we crave prophecy not to know the future, but to give shape to the chaos of the present, to make meaning out of catastrophe, to believe that even the most terrifying events were written, expected, ordained, because to believe that is less frightening than to admit we are adrift in randomness. Nostradamus's quatrains are like constellations in the night sky, vague points of light that become pictures only when we trace the lines ourselves. And those pictures tell us more about the human imagination than about the stars themselves. And yet, we cannot dismiss the eerie precision of certain quatrains, nor the sense that perhaps, just perhaps, Nostradamus glimpsed fragments of something beyond ordinary perception, a realm where time folds upon itself and the future bleeds into the present. If so, then his cryptic style might not be obfuscation but necessity. Because how could a man of the 16th century describe technologies, wars, and ideologies of centuries later without the filter of metaphor? Perhaps the ambiguity was the only possible language through which visions of the future could survive translation across time. In this possibility lies the most haunting hidden meaning of Nostradamus, that the universe itself speaks in riddles, and only by wrapping glimpses of truth in the cloak of mystery can it slip past the boundaries of human comprehension. So we continue to read him, to fear him, to wonder if his unfulfilled prophecies still wait in the shadows of tomorrow, and whether the disasters he described, the burning skies, the shaking earth, the floods that swallow nations, are yet to come, hanging like a sword above us, waiting for the moment when his quatrains, dormant for centuries, suddenly bloom into relevance again. Thus, Nostradamus remains not a closed book of the past, but a living enigma, a mirror into which each age gazes and sees itself, both terrified and enthralled. And as long as humanity hungers for the illusion of foresight, his words will never fade. For the true prophecy of Nostradamus is not about the future at all. It is that we will never stop seeking prophets, and that in the labyrinth of his quatrains, we are really searching for the shape of our own fears, our own fates, and the dark whispers of our collective imagination, which will always find its reflection in the shadows he left behind. The Mayan long count calendar, the day the world was supposed to end. The Mayan long count calendar, carved in stone and etched into the collective imagination of our modern world, became the heartbeat of one of the most widespread apocalyptic fears of the 21st century. For as the digits of the Gregorian clock crept toward December 21, 2012, millions across the globe believed that the end of time itself had been written in the ancient glyphs of a civilization that flourished centuries before Europeans ever set foot in the Americas. Yet to understand the prophecy and its hidden meaning, one must step beyond the popular hysteria and descend into the sacred mathematics of the Maya, who viewed time not as a straight line marching toward oblivion, but as a living cycle of births, deaths, and rebirths, each era rising from the ashes of the one before, each age destined to collapse and give way to another, like great waves crashing upon the eternal shore of existence. And so, when their long count calendar reached the end of a Baktun, the 13th cycle spanning more than 5,000 years, it was not meant to herald the annihilation of the world, but the closing of an age, the death of a cosmic chapter, and the trembling birth of a new one. Yet how easily humanity, gripped by fear and fascination with endings, twisted this mathematical poetry into visions of fire raining from the skies, of earthquakes devouring continents, of comets smashing into the earth, of the sun itself turning against its children. And in that panic, bookstores swelled with apocalyptic predictions, films portrayed ocean-swallowing cities, and countless individuals prepared for a cataclysm that never came, proving perhaps that the most powerful prophecy is not the one carved into stone, but the one carved into human imagination. Still, there is a strange beauty in how a calendar designed to honor the cycles of the cosmos became a mirror for our own anxieties. For in the hidden meaning of the Mayan prophecy lies not the certainty of destruction, but the inevitability of transformation, a truth that resonates across cultures and eras, that no order lasts forever, that civilizations rise, glitter, and vanish, that every cycle of time contains within it both an ending and a beginning. Consider how the Maya themselves perceived existence. They mapped the movements of Venus, tracked eclipses with astonishing precision, and believed that time was sacred, woven into the fabric of the gods themselves, so that to observe the heavens was not merely astronomy, but communion with destiny. To them, the turning of a great cycle was not cause for panic, but for reverence, a reminder that humanity is always caught in the turning gears of a vast celestial machine. What does it say about us, then, that when confronted with this vision, we saw only destruction? Perhaps the hidden meaning is that we moderns, disconnected from the cycles of nature, interpret change as catastrophe, unable to see rebirth in the shadow of endings, while the Maya, closer to the rhythms of the earth and sky, understood that death and renewal are inseparable, that the collapse of one age is the womb of another. And yet, deeper still, one wonders if the Maya themselves foresaw not just a mathematical reset, but the deeper truth that every civilization carries within it the seeds of its own collapse. They themselves, after all, vanished into mystery, leaving behind ruins swallowed by jungle, monuments to a people whose brilliance could not prevent their decline. Was their calendar, then, not only a cosmic cycle, but also a silent prophecy about the destiny of all human societies, including our own? That no matter how advanced, how powerful, how enduring we believe ourselves to be, our empires too will one day crumble, reset, and be forgotten, only to be rediscovered as fragments in the dirt by generations far in the future. This is the darker hidden meaning of the long count. Not that a single date would end the world, but that endings are inevitable, woven into the rhythm of time itself, and that we, like the Maya, will one day face our own Bakhtun's close. The hysteria of 2012, then, was a rehearsal of sorts, a reminder of how easily fear grips us, how desperately we search for signs, how hungry we are to believe that the universe has a timetable and that our lives are chapters in a cosmic script. When December 21st came and went, and the sun rose as it always had, some mocked the prophecy, others sighed in relief, and many simply forgot. But perhaps the true prophecy had been fulfilled, not in fire and flood, but in the way humanity revealed itself, fearful, imaginative, yearning for meaning. The Maya may never have meant to predict an apocalypse, but they succeeded in prophesying something far more unsettling: the power of belief itself to shape human behavior, to conjure realities from imagination, to make millions tremble at the ticking of a clock carved in stone centuries before. And in that sense, the long count calendar still whispers its secret, that time is not ours to command, that we live within cycles greater than ourselves, and that every end, whether feared or welcomed, is but a doorway to something beyond our comprehension, a truth as terrifying as any vision of destruction, and perhaps the only prophecy that will ever prove undeniably true.
Sấm Trạng Trình, the whispering prophecies of Nguyễn Bỉnh Khiêm. The name Nguyễn Bỉnh Khiêm, revered as Trạng Trình in Vietnamese memory, drifts through the centuries like a half-seen figure cloaked in mist, for though he lived in the tumultuous 16th century, an era when dynasties fractured, warlords vied for dominion, and the land itself seemed to cry out for order, his shadow stretches into the present, carried upon the enigmatic verses of his prophecies, the Sấm Ký, which to this day haunt the collective imagination of a nation that has always danced between turmoil and destiny. And as one reads the cryptic phrases attributed to him, one feels the same tremor that Croesus must have felt at Delphi, or that the frightened reader of Nostradamus experiences when a quatrain seems to bleed into modern catastrophe. For the words of Changqin are not simply historical curiosities, but living riddles, lines that shift their meaning with each upheaval, that seem to awaken whenever crisis threatens, and in this uncanny adaptability lies their hidden power. Imagine Nguyễn Bỉnh Khiêm as he was remembered, a Confucian scholar who had risen to the heights of court service only to withdraw in disgust at corruption, retreating into a life of simplicity and teaching. Yet from his retreat in Bac Von Am, his white cloud hermitage, his words spread like fire across the land. Not the stern admonitions of a retired official, but strange utterances tinged with both Buddhist detachment and Taoist mystery, a weaving together of cosmic order and earthly politics. And these utterances, preserved by disciples and passed down through generations, became the Sấm Trạng Trình, prophecies that seemed to speak of dynastic changes, foreign invasions, and the shifting fate of kingdoms. One verse, oft repeated, was said to foretell the later rise of the Tay Son rebels. Bao giờ đã nói thì non moi lan, bao giờ chắc de ngoan da thì moi hết đời nhà lê. A riddle so impossible in its imagery that it seemed a poetic game, until the impossible became reality, until the dynasty did crumble, and people looked back at the verse as though destiny itself had been encrypted within its absurdity. Another prophecy, more chilling still, is said to have foreshadowed the French colonial intrusion centuries later, describing foreign ships as Zac Bey arriving from the sea, a prediction that gave to Nguyễn Bỉnh Khiêm the aura of a seer who had glimpsed centuries ahead. But were these truly his words, or did later generations weave his authority into verses retrofitted to events already unfolding? Here lies the heart of the mystery.
Like Nostradamus, like the Delphic oracle, the power of Trang Sum lies not in verifiable authorship or fixed meaning, but in their ambiguity, their openness to interpretation, their ability to mirror the fears of each generation. The hidden meaning of these prophecies is that they serve as vessels for collective anxiety, poetic frameworks into which people can pour the meaning of their struggles, so that when a dynasty tottered or foreign invaders approached, the words of Trang became proof that such events were written, inevitable, ordained. In this way, the prophecies were less predictions than affirmations, giving comfort to the suffering by suggesting that chaos was part of a larger cosmic script. Yet beneath this cultural use, one senses something more profound. Nguyễn Bỉnh Khiem's deep intuition that history itself is cyclical, that corruption leads to downfall, that foreign pressure follows internal weakness, that rulers who forget virtue invite collapse. His prophecies, when read carefully, often cloak moral lessons in imagery, as if to say, do not be fooled by appearances, for impossible things do occur when virtue is lost, and even the mightiest dynasties can sink like mountains vanishing beneath the sea. The ambiguity of his verses ensured their immortality, for like seeds, they could sprout differently in each age, bearing fruit in ways that could never be falsified. And so the legend of Trang grew, until he was not merely a scholar, but a sage, a prophet whose white cloud hermitage became a shrine of wisdom. The hidden meaning, then, is not that Nguyễn Bỉnh Khiêm possessed supernatural sight, but that he understood the nature of power and the inevitability of its decline, cloaking these insights in riddles so that they would be remembered, quoted, reinterpreted, and feared. And yet, what if we allow ourselves to believe, just for a moment, that he did see? That in his meditations he glimpsed images of cannon fire, ships from the west, the flutter of strange flags over Vietnamese soil. Such visions would not only elevate him to the company of Nostradamus, but also hint that time itself leaks, that in rare moments of clarity, certain minds can pierce the veil. Perhaps this is why his words still unsettle, because they hover between poetry and prophecy, between wisdom and warning, and because Vietnam, a land that has endured countless trials, continues to find in his voice the uneasy reminder that no era is safe from collapse, that every moment of stability carries within it the prophecy of its own undoing. And so the Trang endures, not as a relic of the 16th century, but as a living shadow, a whisper in the ears of rulers and rebels alike, a reminder that history is always waiting to repeat itself, and that the cryptic riddles of a man long dead may still hold the mirror up to the storms yet to come. The Prophecies of Saint Malachy, the Last Pope and the Shadow of the End. The prophecies of St. Malachy, whispered into legend as the prophecy of the popes, carry with them an aura so chilling that even within the walls of the Vatican, where faith and secrecy intermingle like incense and smoke, their existence has been met with nervous silence and hesitant denial. For if true, they chart not merely the succession of pontiffs across centuries, but the very conclusion of the Catholic Church's temporal reign, ending in fire, judgment, and ruin. And so, when one opens the parchment of this prophecy, attributed to Malachy, the 12th century Irish archbishop canonized for his piety, one feels as though stepping into a crypt, where each name, each motto is a gravestone, and at the far end of the tomb lies the final stone, uncarved, waiting for the last pope, whose reign, according to the vision, will coincide with the apocalyptic downfall of Rome itself. The story begins in 1139, when Malachy, traveling to Rome, is said to have been struck by a vision of the entire line of popes from his day until the end of time. He allegedly inscribed this vision as a list of short Latin mottos, each one cryptically describing a future pontiff. And though the manuscript supposedly remained hidden in the Vatican archives for centuries, it surfaced in 1595, published by Arnold de Wyen, and from that moment the world began to tremble at its uncanny resonance with history. The mottos are brief, enigmatic: Ex castro Tiberis, from a castle of the Tiber; De medietate luna, of the half of the moon; de labore solis, from the labor of the sun, and so forth, phrases that seem meaningless until one attaches them to the papal reigns they are said to describe. The believers point to the accuracy, how lumen in colo, light in the sky, matched Pope Leo XIII, whose family crest bore a shooting star. How de medietate luna was linked to Pope John Paul I, who was born in a diocese under the sign of the moon and reigned for precisely 1 lunar month. How de labore solis aligned with Pope John Paul II, born on the day of a solar eclipse and buried during another.
Coincidence, skeptics argue, retrofitted interpretations forced onto vague phrases. But the eerie pattern refuses to be entirely dismissed, especially when the prophecy narrows toward its conclusion, declaring that after a certain number of pontiffs, the line ends with Petrus Romanos, Peter the Roman, who shall shepherd the church through its final tribulation, after which Rome will be destroyed and the great judge will judge his people. Today, the list has been interpreted as having reached its final name, Pope Francis, whose papacy many believe aligns with the ominous description. For though he does not bear the name Peter, he is a Jesuit from Rome itself, and his papal motto, Miserando atque elegendo, echoes with humility, as though preparing the church for its last trial. What makes the prophecy more haunting still is its refusal to explain how or why the end shall come. It simply leaves the image of the eternal city consumed, the church collapsing, judgment at hand, a vision that has haunted Catholic imagination for centuries, shaping even the fears of clergy who dare not publicly acknowledge it. But what is the hidden meaning of St. Malachy's vision? Was it a genuine glimpse of the divine plan, a coded calendar of papal succession embedded into history itself? Or was it a clever forgery from the late 16th century, designed to bolster certain papal claimants during a time of political intrigue? If forgery, then why has it fit so neatly, generation after generation, casting its shadow forward into our own age? Perhaps the secret lies in the nature of prophecy itself, vague enough to be elastic, symbolic enough to be stretched across centuries, and yet evocative enough to draw blood when aligned with real events.
The mottos are like constellations, meaningless dots until the human mind draws lines between them, creating patterns that feel inevitable. The hidden meaning, then, may be less about the divine and more about the human hunger to see order in the chaos of papal succession, to believe that the story of the Church is written, finite, destined. And yet, one cannot fully shake the dread that clings to the prophecy, especially now as wars, scandals, and crises shake the modern Vatican. In each headline of corruption, in each tremor of schism, in each whisper of Rome's decline, some hear the echo of Malachy's final words. In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will feed the flock amidst many tribulations, after which the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge the people. It is the vagueness itself that terrifies, because destruction can come in many forms, not only fire and sword, but cultural erosion, loss of faith, the crumbling of influence. Perhaps the prophecy is not about the physical fall of Rome, but about the slow dissolution of the Church's authority in the modern age, the end of its temporal power, the fading of its spiritual voice amidst the noise of a globalized world. If so, then the prophecy is already fulfilling itself, not in a sudden apocalypse, but in the silent unraveling of an institution that once commanded kings. Or perhaps it is literal, awaiting one final convulsion of history, a war or catastrophe that will level the eternal city as it has been leveled before, leaving only ruins where once the papal throne stood. In this uncertainty lies the genius and the terror of Malachy's prophecy. It cannot be dismissed, it cannot be confirmed. It hovers like a ghost at the edge of history, reminding us that even the most enduring of human structures may be finite, that even Rome, eternal in name, may not escape the cycles of rise and fall. The hidden meaning, then, is not simply about popes, but about impermanence, about the hubris of believing any institution eternal, and about the haunting suspicion that we are always living in the last days, whether or not the world ends in fire. And so the prophecies of Saint Malachy endure, not because we know they are true, but because we fear they might be, and because every time a new pope is chosen, every time the white smoke curls above the Sistine Chapel, the shadow of the last line lingers, whispering that the clock may already have struck its final hour.
The Sibylline books, Rome's lost prophecies and the whisper of doom. The Sibylline books, mysterious scrolls that once dictated the fate of empires, linger in legend as one of history's most tantalizing enigmas, because they were not merely oracles whispered in private chambers, but state secrets guarded in Rome's most sacred temple, consulted only in moments of existential peril, and believed to contain the words of the gods themselves written through the trembling hand of the Sibyl, that shadowy prophetess who appeared and vanished like smoke. Yet the books we speak of are not preserved. Not even fragments remain, for they were destroyed in fire, their words lost forever, leaving behind only the chilling rumor of what they may have contained. Predictions of plagues, wars, famines, and perhaps even the fall of Rome itself. The story begins with King Tarquin the Proud, the last king of Rome, who in the late 6th century BCE was confronted by a strange old woman, veiled and severe, who came bearing 9 volumes of prophecy. She demanded an astronomical price, but when the king scoffed, she burned 3 before his eyes, returning with the remaining 6 at the same price. And when he laughed again, she burned 3 more, until finally, chastened and fearful, he bought the last 3 at full cost, realizing too late that the knowledge contained within was priceless beyond measure. These were the Sibylline books, and from that moment on, they were locked in the temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, guarded by priests who consulted them only in dire times, when pestilence swept through the streets, when Hannibal threatened Rome's gates, when omens darkened the skies. And yet the nature of the texts was always secret, hidden from the common people, their messages filtered through the mouths of priests and senators, making them as much instruments of political power as of divine revelation.
Were they authentic visions of the future, or were they coded warnings from foreign mystics written to manipulate Rome's destiny? Scholars have long debated, but what no one can deny is that the Sibylline books shaped decisions that altered history itself, from the introduction of foreign cults to appease the gods, to the rituals performed in times of crisis, to the very laws enacted under their supposed guidance. The hidden meaning here may be that prophecy, once bound in parchment, becomes not a prediction, but a tool, an instrument wielded by those in power to control the masses with the aura of inevitability. But what is most unsettling is what we will never know, because the original books perished in the Great Fire of 83 BCE that consumed the Temple of Jupiter. Though the Romans frantically sought replacements, scouring the known world for copies of Sibylline verses, the originals, those 9 or 3 books first offered by the Sibyl herself, were gone, their words never to be read again. What truths did they contain? Did they describe Rome's rise and its eventual fall? Did they foretell the emperors, the invasions, the sackings, even the spread of a new faith that would one day eclipse Jupiter himself? We cannot know. We are left only with fragments of later Sibylline oracles, texts compiled under Greek influence, infused with strange mixtures of pagan and even proto-Christian thought, painting visions of burning skies, collapsing kingdoms, cosmic judgment. The hidden meaning here may be that prophecy itself, when institutionalized, becomes indistinguishable from governance, and that the greatest power lies not in foreseeing the future, but in convincing others that you can. And yet, beneath this cynicism, a darker possibility flickers. What if the Sibylline books were genuine? What if, within those lost pages, were encoded the rhythms of history, the cycles of empire, the disasters that even now echo into our own world? The Roman senators treated them with dread, not curiosity. They never read them for pleasure, never studied them for philosophy. They approached them as one approaches a tomb, with fear, reverence, and the desperate hope of survival. That alone suggests the books contained something more terrifying than political slogans. Perhaps they spoke of inevitability, of Rome's own downfall, a fire and ruin that no ritual could avert. Perhaps they whispered of a world beyond Rome, of a future in which the eternal city would be dust and new powers would rise in its place. And now, in their absence, the books have become a prophecy of another kind. They remind us that knowledge itself can be as fragile as papyrus, that the wisdom of ages can vanish in a single blaze, leaving behind only rumors, legends, and the gnawing suspicion that within those ashes lay truths about the world we will never recover. The Sibylline books thus remain one of history's greatest mysteries, not because we can read them, but because we cannot. They are a silence more haunting than words, a vanished prophecy whose hidden meaning may be that the future is always glimpsed, never grasped, and that even the mightiest of empires must someday confront the fate they fear to name.
The Hopi prophecy, the blue star Kachina, and the end of the Fourth World. Among the arid mesas and sunburned cliffs of the American Southwest, the Hopi people have carried for centuries a body of prophecies so profound and so ominous that it has drawn the fascination of anthropologists, spiritual seekers, and conspiracy theorists alike. For unlike the oracles of Greece or the cryptic symbols of medieval seers, the Hopi prophecies are not couched in Latin riddles or cloaked in ecclesiastical secrecy, but spoken in stories passed from elder to child, painted on rocks in petroglyphs, and danced into the dust of the desert during sacred ceremonies. And yet these stories point to nothing less than the cyclical destruction and rebirth of the world itself. A cosmic rhythm in which humanity rises and falls through successive ages, each known as a world, until at last it either learns to live in harmony or is consumed in fire and chaos, leaving the earth barren for generations. According to Hopi belief, we are living in the fourth world, a fragile continuation born from the ashes of the third. And this age, too, carries within it the seeds of destruction, a fate foretold most vividly in the legend of the blue star Kachina, a spirit who will appear in the heavens as a blazing blue star, signaling the great purification, when the world as we know it will end and the fifth world will begin.
The prophecy tells that the blue star Kachina will remove his mask during a sacred dance, revealing the truth of the final cycle, and that before his arrival, the world will undergo a time of corruption and imbalance. Leaders who deceive, technologies that alienate humanity from the earth, and people who forget their sacred obligations to the land and to one another. When this imbalance becomes unbearable, when humanity strays too far, then the blue star will blaze across the sky, and the cleansing fire will sweep the earth. To outsiders, these words may sound like myth or allegory, yet eerily, the Hopi have described in symbolic detail events that resonate with modernity. Spider webs in the sky that many have interpreted as airplane contrails, gourds of ashes falling from the sky, evoking nuclear explosions, iron horses and roads in the sky, recalling trains and airplanes. And most chilling of all is the image of the blue star itself, which some link to the 1987 appearance of supernova 1987A, a dazzling blue light in the heavens, or to a future cosmic event yet to unfold. The hidden meaning of the prophecy may be less about astronomy than about humanity's disconnection from balance. The Hopi have always stressed that the end of one world and the birth of another depend not on celestial bodies but on the choices of human beings, whether they live in humility, respect, and harmony, or whether they exploit, consume, and destroy until the earth itself revolts. The blue star is thus both a literal omen and a metaphor, a reminder that no civilization is eternal, and that every excess carries within it the fire of its own undoing. The Hopi elders have often said that these prophecies are not warnings but instructions, guidance for survival, teaching that if humanity returns to balance, living with the earth rather than against it, the purification need not be catastrophic. But what chills the modern mind is how closely the signs align with our present world. Wars without end, ecological collapse, skies streaked with smoke and pollution, technologies that isolate rather than connect, leaders who speak lies as casually as truth. Are we already witnessing the unraveling of the fourth world? Is the blue star Kachina already at the horizon, invisible to those too distracted by the noise of modernity? The hidden meaning of this prophecy is not resignation but choice. The Hopi remind us that the world has ended before, 3 times, and each time humanity had another chance, another cycle to grow wiser. The question left hanging in the dry desert wind is whether this time we will learn, or whether we will once again march blindly toward the flames, comforted by denial until the sky itself cracks open in light. The blue star Kachina is less a figure of doom than a mirror held to humanity. And what we see reflected there may be far more terrifying than a star in the heavens. It may be our own failure to live in harmony, our own refusal to change, and the certainty that if we do not, the fourth world will pass into dust as surely as the 3 before it, leaving only whispers of prophecy carved into stone, and the haunting reminder that the earth always outlasts those who claim to rule it. The blue star Kachina is less a figure of doom than a mirror held to humanity, and what we see reflected there may be far more terrifying than a star in the heavens. It may be our own failure to live in harmony, our own refusal to change, and the certainty that if we do not, the fourth world will pass into dust as surely as the 3 before it, leaving only whispers of prophecy carved into stone, and the haunting reminder that the earth always outlasts those who claim to rule it.
The dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the statue of empires and the shadow of the end. In the book of Daniel, preserved in the heart of the Hebrew Bible and later absorbed into Christian thought, there lies a vision so enigmatic, so layered with symbolic power, that scholars, theologians, mystics, and kings have wrestled with its meaning for over 2 millennia. For it is not merely a dream, but an entire map of history itself, painted in the fragile form of a colossal statue, whose materials gleam with both majesty and fragility, and whose destruction by a mysterious stone hints at the inevitable collapse of every empire ever raised by human hands. The dream belonged to Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, a ruler whose armies had conquered Jerusalem, whose palaces towered over Mesopotamia, and whose pride seemed limitless. And yet, even in his grandeur, he was haunted by a dream so troubling he could not sleep, a vision he demanded his court magicians interpret. But none could, until Daniel, a captive Jew, stepped forward, guided by the divine. In the dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a mighty statue, its head of gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet of iron mixed with clay. Then, without warning, a stone, uncut by human hands, hurtled from the heavens, struck the feet, and shattered the statue, grinding gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay into dust, blown away by the wind, while the stone grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth. Daniel's interpretation was devastating in its clarity. The statue was a timeline of kingdoms, each metal a successive empire, beginning with Babylon, the head of gold, followed by lesser yet enduring powers, until at last a divided kingdom, strong like iron yet brittle like clay, would arise. And then, at the appointed time, divine intervention would smash them all, ending the reign of human empires forever, and replacing them with a kingdom not built by human hands, eternal and unshakable. The hidden meaning, debated endlessly, is whether the prophecy refers to specific historical empires, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, or whether it is a timeless allegory for the rise and fall of human power, always doomed to crumble when it forgets the source of its authority.
Christians, reading through the lens of the New Testament, have long claimed the stone is Christ himself, the eternal kingdom that destroys worldly power and spreads across the earth. Yet others see in it a political warning, a recognition that every empire, no matter how dazzling, rests upon fragile feet, a mixture of strength and weakness, and that collapse always comes from the foundation, from the fractures within. What chills the modern reader is how the vision echoes across centuries. Each age of empire imagines itself the gold or the iron, the unbreakable dominion. Yet in time it falls, and dust covers its monuments, until the next age builds upon its ruins. Could the feet of iron and clay be our own world? A global civilization outwardly strong with armies, technologies, and networks of iron, yet inwardly fragile, divided by mistrust, corruption, and brittle alliances? If so, then the stone is not merely an ancient image, but a warning still hanging above us, waiting to fall. Some scholars suggest the stone represents not only divine judgment, but also the inevitability of change itself, the forces beyond human control, whether natural disasters, cosmic events, or social revolutions that topple structures thought eternal. Others see in Nebuchadnezzar's dream a personal lesson, a rebuke to his pride. Though he was the head of gold, even he would pass, and his empire would dissolve like dust. The hidden meaning of this prophecy, then, is twofold. On one hand, it is the reminder of divine sovereignty over history, the belief that all human power is temporary before the eternal. On the other, it is the recognition of impermanence itself, that nothing built by human hands, however mighty, can escape the cycle of rise and fall. The statue is not only Babylon or Rome, but every empire, every nation, every civilization that has ever believed itself unshakable. And the stone, that mysterious force uncut by human hands, remains as ambiguous and terrifying as when Nebuchadnezzar first dreamed it. Because whether we call it divine judgment, natural catastrophe, or the slow erosion of decadence, it is the one inevitability that haunts all human ambition, the end. And so the dream continues to trouble us, whispering across time that our towers, our kingdoms, our nations, even our world, stand on feet of clay, and that the wind waits patiently to scatter us into dust.
The Prophecies of Nostradamus, the Seer of Shadows and the Puzzle of Time. Michel de Nostradamus, better known to the world as Nostradamus, sits like a spectral figure at the crossroads of history and myth, his name invoked with equal parts awe and skepticism. His cryptic quatrains quoted in whispers whenever catastrophe strikes, and his shadow stretched across centuries as if he were less a man than a ghost that time itself could not silence. Born in 1503 in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, Nostradamus studied medicine, treated plague victims, and immersed himself in astrology and the occult. But what elevated him above other physicians and stargazers was his peculiar gift, or curse, for weaving visions of the future into dense, symbolic verses, written in a muddled French and Latin blend that concealed as much as it revealed, forming a book of riddles that has outlived empires, Les Prophéties. Within its 10 centuries of quatrains, the world has seen the rise of Napoleon, the terror of Hitler, the fire of London, the beheading of kings, the explosion of Twin Towers, the spread of pandemics, and countless other disasters seemingly mirrored in his words, though always just obliquely enough to leave one unsure whether we are witnessing foresight or the human mind's relentless hunger for patterns.
Consider the quatrain often said to predict the rise of Napoleon. An emperor will be born near Italy who will cost the empire dear, words that eerily echo the Corsican general's ascent. Yet skeptics note the vagueness. Any emperor near Italy might fit. Or the lines linked to Hitler. From the depths of Western Europe, a child will be born of poor people. He will seduce a great troop with his tongue. Uncanny when set beside the Austrian-born dictator, yet the name rendered as Hister may simply refer to the Danube River, not Hitler at all. Then there is the haunting quatrain of two steel birds falling from the sky, interpreted by many as the 9/11 attacks, though written centuries before airplanes existed. The genius or the trick of Nostradamus is this ambiguity. His prophecies are like mist, shifting into meaning only when lit by hindsight, never sharp enough to be definitive, yet never so vague as to be dismissed outright. The hidden meaning may not be in the individual predictions, but in the very structure of prophecy itself. By refusing clarity, Nostradamus ensured relevance. For every age projects its fears and hopes onto his verses, seeing in them the reflection of its own nightmares. But was he merely a clever wordsmith, or did he truly pierce the veil of time? He wrote that his visions came not from mere astrology, but from a kind of divine inspiration, filtered through dreams and trance states, gazing into bowls of water or fire until images arose unbidden.
Perhaps he tapped into something beyond himself, some collective unconscious or universal memory that sees time not as linear, but as a vast ocean whose waves occasionally ripple into the mind. Or perhaps he was a master psychologist, intuiting the cyclical nature of human history. That tyrants rise, that cities burn, that plagues return, and that the same dramas replay under different names, allowing his words to remain true generation after generation. Yet the darker mystery lies in his prophecy still unfulfilled, verses that speak of a final war, of fire in the skies, of floods and famines, of a great king rising in the east, of the world trembling beneath celestial signs, and of an age of destruction that seems ever more plausible in an era of nuclear weapons, climate collapse, and global unrest. Nostradamus has been called both a fraud and a prophet, both a charlatan and a seer, but perhaps he was neither and both, a man who glimpsed the patterns of history in such a way that his words became timeless mirrors, always reflecting the terrors of the present. The hidden meaning of Nostradamus, then, is not that he predicted our future, but that he revealed our obsession with seeking meaning in chaos, our compulsion to see warnings in riddles, to believe that fate is written somewhere if only we can decode it. And yet, when one reads his darker verses, the rivers of blood, the burning skies, the cities consumed, there is a chill that cannot be dismissed, a whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, he did see farther than he should have, that his shadow is long because it stretches all the way to the end of the world. The Oracle Bones of Ancient China, Messages from the Dragon Bones. Deep within the cracked and weathered surfaces of ancient ox scapula and turtle plastrons, scorched by fire and etched with the earliest written characters of China, lies one of humanity's oldest forms of prophecy, the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty, a system so strange and intimate that it seems to straddle the threshold between language and magic, between history and divination. For these bones were not merely tools of ritual, they were cosmic instruments, keys through which kings and shamans sought to converse with the will of heaven, to learn whether a battle would be won, whether rain would fall, whether ancestors were appeased, whether doom itself was already inscribed in fate. And though millennia have passed, the scorched fissures still whisper, their meaning still haunting, as if the fire that cracked them continues to glow faintly with divine light. Discovered in the late 19th century by farmers and scholars who at first mistook them for dragon bones ground into medicine, the oracle bones revealed not only the earliest known form of Chinese writing, but also a culture obsessed with divining the future, with seeking patterns in the unpredictable, with forcing the chaos of existence to reveal some hidden order. The process was meticulous, solemn, terrifying. The bone or shell was prepared, carved with a question in archaic characters. Will the king's army triumph? Shall the rains bless the crops? Will the queen's childbirth be safe? Then a heated rod was applied until cracks splintered across the surface.
The diviner, often the king himself, would then read the cracks as answers, interpreting the jagged lines as the voice of the ancestors or the decree of heaven, and record the result beside the question, creating a permanent record of inquiry and outcome. These inscriptions are the earliest chronicles of Chinese civilization, blending history with prophecy, politics with mysticism. And what emerges from them is both mundane and profound. Harvests, hunts, illnesses, eclipses, invasions, all filtered through the lens of divine will, all questions posed to a cosmos believed to be alive and responsive. Yet beneath this system lies a deeper mystery. Were the bones simply a tool for consolidating royal power, a way for kings to sanctify their decisions by cloaking them in divine approval? Or were they, in some strange way, a genuine interface with forces beyond human comprehension, a technology of the sacred that connected mortals with a larger pattern of reality? The hidden meaning of the oracle bones may be precisely this ambiguity, that they functioned on multiple levels, both psychological and cosmic, both political and spiritual. By etching fears and hopes into bone, by burning them until they cracked, the Shang kings externalized the uncertainty of existence, giving it form, reading it, taming it. In doing so, they created not only a means of prophecy, but also the foundation of a written language, the earliest seeds of a culture that would endure for thousands of years. And yet, the most haunting aspect is how often the answers were grim. The bones whisper of famine, disaster, defeat, sacrifice, death, and the endless anxiety of rulers who knew their thrones rested on fragile foundations. The cracks in bone are metaphors for cracks in power, for fractures in the order of the world, and each divination session carried the unspoken terror that the ancestors might speak of doom. Some scholars believe the act of divination itself influenced decisions, that if the cracks were read as ill-omened, a campaign might be abandoned, a policy reversed, thus making the bones self-fulfilling prophecies, shaping history as much as predicting it. Others argue that the true meaning was psychological, offering rulers the illusion of control, a way to face the terrifying uncertainty of life with ritual certainty. But still others, more mystical, suggest that by inscribing questions and summoning cracks through fire, the Shang kings tapped into a deeper resonance of the cosmos, a form of communication that bypassed reason, a dialogue between matter and spirit. The bones, after all, are not random. Each crack spreads according to hidden physical laws, each line unique, and perhaps the ancients sensed that these patterns, like the stars above or the veins of leaves, carried messages from a universe that always speaks in signs, if only one knows how to read them. The hidden meaning of the oracle bones may be this, that prophecy is less about seeing the future than about transforming fear into pattern, chaos into narrative, and that in doing so, one discovers that the line between magic and history, between superstition and civilization, is thinner than bone. The Shang dynasty is long gone, its kings dust, its palaces ruins, yet the oracle bones endure, and when we gaze at their cracks today, we see not only the birth of writing, but the eternal human desire to ask the universe questions it may never answer, and the haunting possibility that sometimes, through fire and fracture, it answers nonetheless. The Mayan prophecy of 2012, the end of the long count calendar. In the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, carved into towering stone stelae and preserved in codices that somehow survived the flames of conquest, the Maya left behind one of the most enigmatic systems of timekeeping the world has ever known. A calendar so precise that it not only tracked the movement of planets and eclipses with astonishing accuracy, but also wove human destiny into a cosmic tapestry. And at the heart of this calendar was a cycle known as the long count, a vast measure of time stretching across thousands of years, culminating on a date that would resonate across the modern world. December 21, 2012, the so-called end of the calendar. The day that ignited global fascination, fear, and fevered speculation. When millions whispered of apocalypse, of planetary alignments, of a world reborn or destroyed.
Yet, for the Maya themselves, time was never linear. It was cyclical, spiraling, repeating, and every ending was but a beginning concealed in shadow. To them, the long count's completion was not a doomsday, but a transition, a great turning of the cosmic wheel, the closing of the 13th Bacton, a cycle of 5,125 years, and the opening of a new era in which the cosmos itself would be renewed. But the mystery deepens when we ask, why did the Maya place such weight on cycles? Why did they imagine time as something that could end and yet continue? Why encode in stone such precise astronomical data unless they believed that human fate was inextricably linked to the rhythms of the stars? Some say the prophecy of 2012 was misunderstood, twisted by modern anxieties into a vision of destruction the Maya never intended. Others insist that the ancient seers foresaw a transformation of consciousness, not a fiery end, but a shift in human awareness, a thinning of the veil between worlds, an invitation to align once more with the sacred order of the cosmos. Consider the eerie coincidences. In the years leading to 2012, the world indeed seemed to teeter on thresholds. Economic collapse, political upheaval, environmental crises, technological revolutions that blurred the line between the virtual and the real, and some began to believe that though the earth did not burn, the world as we knew it had, in some sense, ended, and we had stepped into something new, something uncharted. The hidden meaning of the Mayan prophecy may be less about cataclysm than about perspective. It teaches that civilizations rise and fall, that time itself consumes empires as surely as the jungle consumes abandoned temples, and that to imagine an end is to recognize our smallness against the vast cycles of creation and destruction. And yet, there are darker whispers. Some argue that the Maya encoded astronomical events, that on such dates alignments occur which may unleash energies we barely comprehend, that solar flares, magnetic reversals, or unseen cosmic forces could indeed alter life on Earth, that perhaps the end was delayed or miscalculated, its true hour still approaching. Others look inward and claim that the prophecy has already been fulfilled, not in fire from the sky, but in the collapse of certainty, the death of the old world order, the rise of new paradigms that fracture our sense of reality. When we gaze at the long count and its cycles, when we see the meticulous calculation of days, moons, planets, we realize that the Maya were not primitive dreamers of doom, but astronomers, philosophers, keepers of a cosmic rhythm that modern science still struggles to fully grasp. And their prophecy, whether of endings or awakenings, remains a mirror, reflecting not the will of gods alone, but the fears and hopes of humanity itself. For when the clock struck 2012 and the world did not burn, the prophecy did not die. It lingered, a riddle, a reminder that time is not a straight path, but a circle, that every end conceals a beginning, and that perhaps the true mystery is not whether the Maya predicted the end of the world, but whether they were trying to tell us that worlds end every day, in ways both great and small, and that the only true prophecy is change. The Norse prophecy of Ragnarök, Twilight of the Gods. In the frozen sagas of the North, sung by skalds beside flickering hearth fires while the wind howled across fjords and mountains, there lies a prophecy so bleak and yet so strangely inevitable that it haunted the very soul of Viking civilization. Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, the destined end not only of humanity but of the gods themselves, a cosmic drama of betrayal, fire and ice, foretold in verses of the poetic Edda, where seers and seeresses spoke of a day when even Odin, the All-Father, would fall, when Thor would clash with the serpent Jörmungandr, when Fenrir the wolf would break his chains, and the 9 worlds would be consumed in flame and drowned in sea. And though to us it may sound like mere myth, to the North it was an inescapable truth. For theirs was a world where fate, known as weird, was a binding force, woven by the Norns, unchangeable even by the mightiest gods. And so every feast, every battle, Every voyage across stormy seas carried the shadow of Ragnarök, the knowledge that all creation was hurtling toward a catastrophic rebirth. Yet what lies hidden beneath this doom-laden prophecy? Was Ragnarök truly a vision of the end, or was it a metaphor for cycles of renewal, a way for the Norse to comprehend the harshness of their world, where winters could kill whole villages, where volcanoes and earthquakes tore the earth, where the sea itself seemed always ready to swallow ships whole? In the imagery of Ragnarök, we see not only apocalypse but natural memory. The Fimbulwinter, a 3-year-long frost that heralds the end, may echo ancient climatic disasters. The fiery destruction wrought by Surtur and his flaming sword could recall volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky. The drowning of the earth beneath waves could remember tsunamis or rising seas. Yet beyond these echoes of reality, there is a deeper, more philosophical meaning. Ragnarök is not chaos but destiny fulfilled, the idea that even gods cannot escape time, that power, no matter how vast, must bow to entropy. Odin, knowing he will be devoured by the wolf, still rides to battle, because courage in the face of inevitability is itself the highest virtue. Thor, knowing the serpent's poison will kill him, still strikes the final blow. Even Loki, the trickster, is bound to play his part, his betrayals necessary for the pattern to unfold. And here we see a profound message, that life's meaning is not in endless survival, but in how one meets the end. That doom embraced with honor transforms destruction into transcendence. Some scholars suggest Ragnarök reflects an agricultural cycle, a symbolic death and rebirth tied to seasons, a mythologized winter solstice writ large across eternity. Others suggest it is an esoteric truth, that the Norse, like the Maya and Hindus, believed in cosmic cycles, worlds destroyed and remade, time itself repeating endlessly, so that after the flames and floods, a new earth will rise from the waters, green and pure, where survivors will repopulate the world, and Balder, the slain god of light, will return from the underworld to usher in an age of renewal. And perhaps this is the hidden meaning, that Ragnarök is not the end but a cleansing, a mythic acknowledgement that corruption, violence, and decay must eventually collapse, and from their ashes something new must emerge. The Vikings, living lives steeped in war, knew that all things fall, that even heroes perish, but they also knew that death feeds life, that endings seed beginnings. And so their prophecy is not a lament, but a reminder to live with ferocity, to carve one's saga into the fabric of time, even if the stars themselves are doomed to fade. Today, when we read of Ragnarök, we hear not only the roar of wolves and the clash of giants, but the echo of our own anxieties, of climate collapse, of wars that seem endless, of systems crumbling, of a world on the brink. And the prophecy whispers that perhaps we too are approaching a twilight, not of God's, but of our own making. And the question becomes not whether the end will come, for all ends do, but whether we will face it with despair or with the defiance of Thor raising his hammer against the serpent, knowing he will fall, but striking anyway, because in that act lies the only immortality mortals or gods can ever claim. The Hopi prophecy of the blue star Kachina, the purification time. Among the mesas and deserts of the American Southwest, where the red earth meets an endless sky, the Hopi people have preserved one of the most haunting and enigmatic prophecies in Native American tradition, a vision passed down through countless generations of elders and storytellers, whispered during ceremonies and carved into petroglyphs, warning of an approaching transformation of the world, a time of great trial and cleansing known as the Purification, heralded by the arrival of the blue star Kachina, a spirit being who would appear in the heavens as a celestial sign that the old age was ending and a new one was beginning. A prophecy that has fascinated outsiders and baffled scholars for decades. Because unlike many myths confined to symbolic landscapes, this Hopi vision speaks with startling specificity of future upheavals, of the corruption of humanity, of the loss of spiritual balance, and of cosmic events that would shake the earth itself. The Hopi, who see themselves as guardians of sacred knowledge and caretakers of the balance between human beings and the natural world, believe that the world has already passed 3 great ages, each destroyed because humanity lost harmony with creation, one by fire, one by ice, one by flood, and that we now live in the 4th world, nearing its end, with the 5th waiting to be born.
The blue star Kachina, sometimes called Sakwasoha, is said to dance in the plaza, removing his mask before children, signaling the end of all ceremonial cycles, and when he appears in the sky, humanity will know that the great purification is at hand. Some interpret this figure literally as a comet or star that will blaze suddenly in the heavens, while others see him as symbolic, a messenger of cosmic alignment, a herald of global transformation. The prophecy speaks of signs, roads in the sky, airplanes, cobwebs spun in the air, telegraph wires, later the internet, rivers of stone across the land, highways, the sea turning black, oil spills, and youth losing their way, all of which seem eerily aligned with modern realities, suggesting that the Hopi foresaw the unraveling of balance in the modern age. But the most mysterious aspect lies in the purification itself, described as a time when the earth will shake, when the oceans will rise, when fire will cleanse, when only those who remain true to the ways of harmony, respect, and humility will survive into the 5th world. To some, this sounds like an ecological prophecy, a warning that environmental collapse will destroy the arrogant civilizations that exploit the earth, leaving only those who live in balance with her to endure. To others, it is spiritual, a metaphor for humanity's need to shed materialism and return to sacred ways.
And yet, there are those who look to the skies, wondering whether the Hopi foresaw an actual astronomical event, perhaps a supernova, perhaps a star like Betelgeuse collapsing, or a comet whose blue light would blaze across the heavens. The hidden meaning of the blue star Kachina may be precisely this duality, that prophecy operates on multiple planes, both literal and symbolic, both cosmic and earthly, and that whether or not a star truly flares, humanity is already living in the purification time, where corruption, violence, greed, and imbalance are being exposed, burned away, leaving only what is essential. Elders say that those who cling to the old ways, who respect the sacredness of life, will survive, while those who resist will perish. And in this message there lies a profound truth. Civilizations fall when they betray the very foundations of harmony that sustain them. And the purification is less about punishment than about renewal. Today, when we look at our fractured world, fires consuming forests, seas rising, storms intensifying, societies polarized, technology spinning webs of both connection and deception, we cannot help but feel the resonance of the Hopi prophecy, as though the blue star Kachina has already begun his dance, unseen yet felt, a reminder that the 5th world is not a promise but a possibility, and whether we reach it depends on how we respond to the unraveling around us. Perhaps the true hidden meaning of this prophecy is that humanity is always at a threshold, always one step away from collapse and one step away from renewal, and that the star we must see is not in the sky, but in ourselves, a light to guide us through the purification into whatever world awaits beyond the ashes of this one.
The Celtic Prophecies of Merlin, the Enchanter's visions of Britain's fate. In the mist-shrouded landscapes of Celtic Britain, where standing stones cast long shadows across wind-swept plains and oak groves whispered with sacred mystery, there lingers a figure both historical and mythical, half druid and half wizard, whose name has become synonymous with prophecy itself. Merlin, the enigmatic seer of Arthurian legend, the wild man of the woods whose cryptic visions were said to foretell the fate of kings, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the destiny of Britain itself. And though centuries have passed since his name first appeared in the chronicles of Geoffrey of Monmouth, his prophecies still echo with haunting resonance. For within their cryptic lines lie riddles that seem to reach beyond medieval politics into timeless mysteries about power, decay, and rebirth.
The so-called Prophecies of Merlin, woven into Geoffrey's Historia Regum Britanniae, and later expanded in his Prophetia Merlini, speak in a language of symbols and beasts, of dragons locked in battle beneath a crumbling tower, of lions devouring children, of forests blooming in barren places, images so dreamlike and layered that they invite endless interpretation. At their heart lies the tale of the red dragon and the white dragon, discovered by the boy prophet beneath the foundations of King Vortigern's collapsing tower. The red dragon, symbol of the Britons, locked in eternal combat with the white dragon, emblem of the invading Saxons. Their struggle a metaphor for the fate of the island itself.
Here we glimpse the true power of Merlin's vision, not a literal prediction, but a symbolic framework, a way to comprehend the tides of history, to transform conquest and resistance into cosmic narrative, and in doing so, to imbue political struggle with mythic weight. Yet Geoffrey's prophecies do not end with dragons. They sprawl across centuries, foretelling rulers by animal forms, kingdoms torn by strife, rivers flowing with blood, and a mysterious return of a golden age when the boar of Cornwall, Arthur himself, will rise again. To medieval listeners, these prophecies were not quaint fables, but living oracles, invoked by rulers to legitimize power, by rebels to stir resistance, by poets to cloak truths in allegory. But what lies hidden beneath their imagery? Some argue that Merlin, if he ever lived, was a memory of ancient Celtic seers, druids who read the patterns of nature, whose visions were encoded in myth long after their priesthood was suppressed by Rome and Christianity. Others see the prophecies as political propaganda, Geoffrey's attempt to weave a grand narrative of British destiny, casting the Normans and their predecessors into a drama of divine inevitability. And yet, there remains something uncanny in the way these visions seem to ripple through time. The red dragon endures as the emblem of Wales. The myth of Arthur's return resurfaces in every age of crisis, and Merlin himself remains an archetype of the seer, half feared, half revered, standing at the edge of madness and wisdom. Perhaps the hidden meaning of the Merlinic prophecies is that nations, like individuals, need myths of destiny, symbols to give meaning to chaos, and seers to translate the incomprehensible violence of history into stories that can be endured. But there is also a darker reading, that prophecy itself can entrap, that by believing their fate was already written in Merlin's riddles, the people of Britain may have unconsciously shaped their history to fit them, living inside a spell of self-fulfillment. Still others whisper that Merlin's visions were not merely allegorical, but glimpses of cyclical time, that like the Maya and Norse, the Celts understood history as a wheel, endlessly turning, and that his riddles were attempts to articulate this cosmic rhythm. And what of the prophecy of Arthur's return, the sleeping king beneath the hill who will rise in Britain's hour of greatest need? Is it merely political nostalgia, a dream of national unity, or is it an archetypal truth, that in every culture the hope for renewal takes form as a hidden king, waiting, sleeping, promising that decline is not the final word? When we read Merlin's prophecies today, we may see superstition, medieval politics, or poetic invention. But beneath all this, we sense something deeper, the timeless human hunger to know the shape of the future, to believe that history has meaning, to find in riddles and symbols the assurance that even in chaos there is pattern. Perhaps the true enigma of Merlin is not whether he foretold the fate of Britain, but whether Britain, or indeed any people, can exist without such prophecies, without the dream that someone, somewhere, can see through the mist and glimpse the shape of destiny. The prophecy of the Sibylline oracles, voices of the ancient Seeresses. In the crumbling temples of Greece and Rome, in scrolls recopied by monks long after the flames of empire had turned to ash, survived the haunting words of the Sibyls, women believed to speak not their own thoughts, but the voices of the gods themselves. Their prophecies collected into what came to be known as the Sibylline oracles, a strange and fragmentary body of texts that weave together pagan visions, Jewish hopes, and Christian revelations into a single tapestry of riddled warnings and cosmic promises.
a testament to the enduring power of prophecy across civilizations. The Sibyls were not one but many, scattered across the ancient world, at Delphi, Cumae, Erythrae, Persia, and beyond. Women who entered trances, inhaled vapors, and spoke in cryptic verses. Their words recorded, revered, and feared. To the Romans, the Sibylline books housed in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill were sacred guides consulted in times of crisis. When famine struck, when plague ravaged, when enemies threatened, the Senate would unroll the scrolls and seek the cryptic counsel of the Sibyls, who spoke of rituals to appease gods, of sacrifices to avert doom, of foreign cults to be welcomed lest wrath consume the city. These oracles, however, were not straightforward. They spoke in riddles, in images of fire and flood, of beasts rising, of empires falling, of a savior king yet to come. When Rome trembled at Hannibal's march, when the shadow of civil war darkened the republic, when emperors trembled on their thrones, the Sibylline verses were invoked, their words bending history as much as they foretold it.
But the story does not end with Rome's fall. The Sibylline oracles that survive to us, preserved in Christian contexts, are not the same scrolls once locked in the Capitoline Temple. Those burned long ago. What remains is a strange amalgam, a collection of prophetic poems likely composed between the 2nd century BCE and the 7th century CE, blending Greek myth, Jewish apocalyptic visions, and early Christian theology. In them we hear of floods and fires, of a final judgment, of a messianic figure who will bring peace, of stars falling, of nations destroyed. They are at once deeply rooted in the fears of antiquity and strangely timeless, echoing with themes that reappear in every age of prophecy: corruption leading to ruin, arrogance punished, a remnant saved, a new order born from ashes. Some scholars dismiss them as political propaganda, tools for legitimizing Jewish and Christian hopes under pagan rule. Others see them as genuine windows into how ancient peoples made sense of catastrophe, war, and the shifting empires around them. And yet, beyond the scholarly debates, there remains the eerie fact that so many of their riddles seem perpetually relevant, as though the Sibyls did not so much predict specific events as speak to archetypal patterns of human history: pride, hubris, collapse, renewal.
Consider, too, the tale of the Cumaean Sibyl, who offered King Tarquin 9 books of prophecy at a ruinous price. When he refused, she burned 3, then 3 more, until he relented and bought the last for the full sum. Here lies a chilling truth about prophecy. Knowledge of the future is precious, dangerous, and costly, and once lost, it can never be regained. The hidden meaning of the Sibylline oracles may be precisely this: that prophecy is less about foretelling than about warning, less about inevitability than about possibility, and that, in the words of Seeresses long dead, we hear the timeless cry that humanity must change or perish. For though the empires they spoke to are long dust, their words remain alive, whispering across centuries, adapting to new contexts, warning new peoples, always speaking of fire, flood, judgment, and renewal. Today, when we face crises of our own making, climate collapse, wars, pandemics, technological upheavals, we may hear in the Sibyl's riddles an unsettling mirror, as though they foresaw not particular dates, but the eternal rhythm of hubris and consequence, decay and rebirth. And perhaps that is why their prophecies have endured, not because they told the future with precision, but because they revealed the structure of fate itself, a pattern that repeats as long as humanity repeats its follies. To listen to the Sibyls is to step into a chorus of voices that are both ancient and eternal, reminding us that the future is always uncertain, always perilous, always pregnant with both doom and hope. Their words, though fragmented, still carry the scent of burning temples, the sound of winds over ruined cities, the weight of ages collapsing. And in their riddled visions lies the final enigma of prophecy, that to seek certainty in the future is to confront the eternal uncertainty within ourselves.